So, good afternoon everyone and welcome to Discover the World Education's virtual trip to Iceland. My name is Karen. I work at Discover the World Education. For over 20 years prior to that, I was head of department and pastoral deputy, and I've worked at a variety of different schools. Decided to take a career break around about 5 years ago, disappeared off with my family to Iceland and trained as an Icelandic guide. I'm very lucky that over the last 25 years, I've taken many trips to Iceland, and I now have the opportunity to arrange fabulous tours out there and also lead them. So I absolutely get to teach in the best classroom in the world. Today, I'm going to take you on a virtual trip around Iceland. I'm really aware that many of you watching had your trips cancelled this year. And so I hope that this webinar will keep you excited about visiting the land of fire and ice in the future, and to see how geographically it can really enrich and enhance your learning in the classroom. For those of you who are planning to visit soon, I hope over the next hour I will whet your appetite and give you a glimpse of the sights and highlights that you will experience. So let's start by looking at the location of Iceland. It sits in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Geographically and geologically, it's very, very new. It's only 25 million years old, which actually geologically is a very, very new country. It's around about 40,000 square miles in its area, just slightly larger than Ireland. It sits 66 degrees north, and the northernmost tip of the country is around about 44 kilometres south of the Arctic Circle. It does have the northernmost capital in the world, being Reykjavik. The population of Iceland is around about 360,000, and 170,000 of those actually live in the capital city. It really is the land of fire and ice. It was a land created by volcanism, moulded by glaciers and rivers. 11% of the country is covered in ice and glaciers, and 25% of it is covered in lava fields. Has around about 20 active volcanoes, the most famous being Hekla, Katla, and Eyjafjallajokull. Despite a land that actually does suffer sometimes by natural hazards and is quite a harsh climate, it is considered to be one of the top 5 happiest places in the world to live. It has the highest life expectancy of any other country in the world, and it consistently ranks in the top 6 in the Human Development Index. Our tour today is going to focus on the southwest corner of Iceland. You can see here that I have ringed the area that we are going to visit. You will see on the bottom left-hand side on the southwest corner a large aeroplane. This marks where the airport is, Keflavik. This sits on the edge of the Reykjanes Peninsula. And we are going to travel down Road 1. There is only really one main road in Iceland. It's called Road 1. It's the ring road that goes around the outside. So we are going to travel in a southeasterly direction along Road 1 from Keflavik into Reykjavik, down through Hveragerdi, Selfoss, Skogafoss, going along a few sites and highlights down to Vík, which is the most southern tip of Iceland, and then we're going to travel up and go a little bit inland towards sort of like the Golden Circle area, consisting of Pingvellir, Gullfoss and Geysir. So as we go through our tour, you will notice that within the slides, I'm going to actually pinpoint the areas that we are going to visit. So this will kind of help you navigate your way around the country as I talk about the sites and highlights. So the Reykjanes Peninsula will be the first thing that you will come across when you visit Iceland. It is a UNESCO Global Geopark. It is tectonically and geologically very unique, and it is a very active area, both in terms of tectonics and in terms of geothermal energy. It's the only place, or this particular ridge that leads from the Reykjanes Peninsula through the central part of Iceland, is the only place where the mid-Atlantic ridge sits above sea level. There are 4 distinct volcanic zones within the Reykjanes Peninsula, and there are hundreds of fissures and faults. There are also quite frequent earthquakes. This particular area was where Neil Armstrong and his NASA team in the 60s came along and they trained in this particular area for around about 6 to 9 months in order to prepare for the moon landings. And it was considered that the harsh, bleak environment and the nature of the lava was similar to what he would and his team would experience when they landed on the moon. We're going to look also at this particular area. It's an area within the Reykjanes Peninsula, and it actually marks one of the fissures on the edge of the North American plate. So it's called the bridge between the continents because it's kind of the edge of the North American plate where it meets the Eurasian plate. Now, we know that in geography, you don't really have straight lines. There are a lot of fuzzy boundaries, as we call them. So these fissures, whilst they mark the edge of the continental plate, there are several of them. There's not actually a distinct line that we can say that is the edge of the plate boundary. What's really important here is as you go down into the fissure, you can see this tectonic timeline showing the different lava flows over the years. So you can actually see in front of you there the different layers of rock showing the different volcanic eruptions that have happened. It's great here to have sort of like the teachers on the Eurasian plate and the students on the American plate, and you know, you can see that you're worlds apart. Yeah, you're obviously only a few meters apart, really. In this particular area, there are lots of different types of rocks and landforms and different formations. And I just want to point out 2 to you in this particular slide, the different types of lava. There are 2 distinct types of lava in this area. There's the very viscous, thick, heavy, sharp lava called the RR lava. And this is when what comes out of a volcano. It moves very, very slowly. It's quite dense. You know that it's called RR because if you were to walk on it, you would go as you're stepping on it. Also in this area, you have a different type of lava called the Pahoehoe lava. This is very typical of the lava that comes out of volcanoes like the shield volcanoes in Hawaii. So it's a much faster running lava, it's slightly hotter, and it ripples as the lava on the top actually cools more quickly than the lava underneath. And in this particular area, you can actually see that there are these two different types of lava. Still staying along the Reykjanes Peninsula here, and we come to the Gunnuhver hot springs. This is the largest hot spring in Iceland. It sits at around about 20 meters in diameter, and it is a fumarole, so it is belching hot steam out of the ground. And what happens here is you have got a boiling geothermal reservoir. The water emanates from the ground, it condenses, it mixes with other groundwater, with the CO2, with the hydrogen sulfide, and this combination actually turns the water into acid. This acid then turns the lava into clay. And you can see very clearly in this slide that a lot of the ground has actually turned here to sort of like a sticky clay mixture. If you can imagine some boiled eggs that have been in the fridge for a few days and they smell quite rotten, quite sulfuric, that is what this area actually smells like as well. So you've got the hot steam, you've got bubbling clay, you've got a belching fumarole, as well as the smell of rotten eggs. Icelandic folklore actually will tell you a slightly different story, and they will tell us that actually there was a female ghost in this area called Gunna, and a priest was trying to protect the residents of this particular area, and he set a trap, and she fell in, and actually she's been very angry and venting ever since. The Reykjanes coastline is very, very unique. As I said, it is the only place on the mid-Atlantic ridge that is actually visible above the sea. And because we have very, very resistant rock in Iceland, we actually have quite steep, very, very sort of like sharp cliffs. So there are lots of stacks, lots of stumps, lots of lava formations. In addition to that, the waves here are incredibly powerful. If you head due south from this particular point on the Reykjanes Peninsula and just keep on going, your first land that you are going to hit will be Antarctica. So you imagine some of those waves have travelled thousands of kilometres before they get to Iceland. So they are incredibly powerful, incredibly destructive. And this area actually shows that sort of like, you know, natural harnessing of power against this particular coastline. Across this particular peninsula, there are lots and lots of craters, mini craters, because this area isn't just sort of like full of what I call the typical cone-shaped volcanoes. This area has got lots of fissures and cones, okay? So you get this sort of like rippling effect. It looks like broken eggshells, and these are where the magma was released under pressure through the fissures, through the cracks, through the faults. And then in some areas, you may get an isolated crater like this one that we can see here. So you can see this crater, and then in the distance, you can see another crater. And then in the distance to that, you can see the line of the fissures, sort of like in the distance. So you can imagine that 6,000 years ago, this would have been sort of like releasing the magma and the gas and the lava from the ground. So a very, very tectonically active sort of area. I want to talk to you a little bit about the economy in Iceland, because as you travel across the Reykjanes Peninsula towards Reykjavik, and like you can see there on the bottom map that I've put here, you come across a kind of an eyesore, to be honest, because you have this UNESCO geopark, which is being protected from construction, from building, from development. And you come across this aluminium plant right in the middle of nowhere, okay? And aluminium now accounts for 20% of the Icelandic economy. There are 3 major aluminium plants in Iceland, and you may ask the question, why? Okay, so if you think about your industrial location, you need power. Iceland has plenty of power. It has lots of renewable, sustainable power. They don't burn any fossil fuels at all, apart from with their transportation, with their cars, with their buses, and with their aeroplanes. So all of their sort of power comes either from geothermal energy or hydroelectric power. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go on through. Hydroelectric power is what powers the aluminium plants. 70% of the power that Iceland produces comes from hydroelectric, and of that 70%, 90% is used for the aluminium factories. So power is very cheap in Iceland, it's very renewable, it's very sustainable. Aluminium processing needs huge amounts of power. It is a great heating process, changing the raw materials into the aluminium foil that you and I have in our kitchens. In order to build a plant like this, you also need space. Iceland has plenty of space. If you think, it's an island around about the size of Ireland, yet it only has 360,000 people. So it is very, very sparsely populated. They have plenty of space. So therefore, to put a plant like this one, which is just over 1 kilometre in length, they do have plenty to do that. In addition to that, they are logistically very, very well located in between the Americas and Europe, and ultimately into Asia. So therefore, they are perfect in terms of a distribution site. But not just that, they've also got very deep harbours, so therefore they can bring the raw materials in from all around the world. So therefore, aluminium in Iceland is a very, very important part of their economy. And, and they have all the different ingredients that they need to make it quite a successful industry. So moving on to more sort of like physical geography, really. Along the Reykjanes Peninsula, so we're still in the same area, there are a number of lava tubes, a number of lava caves that have recently opened up. This particular one is one of my favourites for the very reason that, one, it's quite big, so I don't feel as if I'm in a very enclosed space, but also the colours here are just spectacular. There is no enhanced lighting on this particular picture. This is the actual colours of what you'd see in a lava tube or a lava cave. Can you see? Absolutely fantastic. High contents of iron, where you can see the red. You can also see some bluey green areas depicting the copper, and then the sulphury type areas, which is depicting sort of the yellowy colour there, the yellow and orange. You can also see here the different types of lava. On the left-hand side, you have got the RR lava that I said about, so that thick lava that dries quite quickly, okay, and hardens quite quickly and quite blocky. Yet on the right-hand side, you've got the very much more hoey lava. Lava tubes form when you have got flowing lava in an area, in a crack, rather like a river. And then what happens is the outside of the lava starts to harden, which insulates the lava inside. This then becomes even more heated because it becomes superheated under pressure, so it starts moving quite quickly. And then over time, as the sort of like the magma chamber starts to empty and the lava lessens, obviously you get not much lava left, it flows out the other end, and you end up with this particular lava tube. If you look closely on the right-hand side, so just above where the viewing platform is, you can see there some little drops of lava. So these are stalactites made out of lava, and they happen when you have got the very runny lava that clings onto the edge of the lava tunnel and then starts to drip down. And then I know we can't see it on this particular slide, but actually there are stalagmites at the bottom. So you've got these columns of lava that are also being formed when the material dropped and made the different formations in the lava tube itself. So moving on to the other type of energy. So we've already talked about a little bit about hydroelectric power, although we will go to a hydroelectric power plant later on. Let's look at geothermal energy. This particular picture here you can see is the Hellisheiði geothermal power plant. It is the largest geothermal plant in Iceland. It's the 6th largest geothermal power plant in the world. In this particular power plant, there are 30 boreholes with 6 high pressure turbines. And what happens is they pump water down into where the magma is closest. This is then superheated and the steam turns the turbines, which creates the electricity. A byproduct of this is the hot water, which is then sent around the area to use for heating and for hot water for domestic use. You will notice that the pipes here are zigzagged, okay? And I often wondered what these were, and then we had a fantastic tour of this particular power station, and I asked the reason why that was. Was it to protect them from earthquakes? Was it to protect from the weather? But no, it's not. It's actually to slow the water down, because what happens is the water moves so quickly within these pipes that it becomes too hot for domestic use. So these pipes actually slow the water down and make it a little bit easier to use, sort of like in the homes. This particular power plant is incredibly forward-thinking. The technology and the vision of this power plant is widely within the world seen as being one of the best. and therefore real signs of globalization here, as many visitors, businesses, engineers from all around the world come here on training events, and so that they're sharing their ideas, sharing their knowledge, sharing the technology, so that hopefully other countries, for example, a couple of years ago, a big industry from Indonesia were at this power plant, and hopefully can take the technology back to other countries so that we can have more sustainable and more renewable energy sources like this one around the world. I'm quite a big fan of architecture, and if you look at this particular building here, it has been architecturally designed to represent the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. You have the two flat buildings here, which are representative of the two plates, and then you have this higher area here, which is representative of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So it's very clever in terms of its design, as well as what it's actually doing in this particular area. Eyjafjallajokull is a volcano that I'm sure that the majority of you have studied or heard of in school. This was a volcano that erupted in 2010. It's very famous, and I'm sure that you use it as a case study, not just to look at the impacts and the causes and the effects of a volcano, but I think more recently to use it as how the lessons of that particular volcano have been learned in terms of preparing and planning for the actual future. When you travel from the Reykjanes Peninsula down to Vík, you do go through quite a lot of the valleys that were flooded due to the glacial outwash after this particular eruption. If you didn't join my webinar last week on the Eyjafjallajokull eruption, I would recommend that you join me on Monday. We're going to do another live broadcast on that particular eruption, or you can actually see it on our YouTube, on the Geographical Association YouTube channel if you want to look at it there. So we know that Iceland is famous for its waterfalls, and we're going to see about 4 or 5 waterfalls on our tour. The first one is Seljalandsfoss. And when we typically learn about waterfalls, we talk about hard and soft rock. In the textbook, it says we've got hard rock sitting over soft rock. The soft rock gets worn away, it gets eroded, hydraulic action, abrasion, attrition, and then there's an undercut, and then the hard rock collapses and the waterfall moves back. So I'm going to throw that theory out of the window completely. And the first 3 waterfalls that we're going to look at on our tour around Iceland are nothing to do with hard and soft rock at all. They're all to do with isostatic rebound. So isostatic rebound is when the land is still adjusting due to tectonic and glacial activity. So in this particular area, the ice has melted from the Reynishverfi glacier, and the tectonic activity is still keeping in balance. So therefore, this land has pushed up. And what we are seeing here are what used to be sea cliffs, but now they are between 6 and 8 kilometers inland. We can be a really good geographer here, and we can look at the evidence to see why we know that that is the case. And when we look at these cliffs in the undercut, because it does have an undercut and a plunge pool and an overhang, and when we are able to walk into the undercut, you can take a look at the cliff and you will actually be able to see fossils in there of fish and birds and quite a lot of seashells as well. And the rock in the undercut is actually sedimentary rock. So it is rock that has been under the sea, okay? And the rock at the top is actually the lava. So we do have the hard and soft rock, but that's not how this particular waterfall is actually made. It's around about 60 meters high, and it is not really a glacial waterfall. This actual water comes from the highlands. So it does come from the glaciers originally, but the majority of it is actually groundwater, so rainwater that is flowing in the areas around. And as we walk along the sea cliff, there are many waterfalls along this sea cliff. This one is my personal favourite. This is the Canyon Dweller waterfall. You can only access this waterfall by walking through a river, through into the gorge. And then as you come around the corner, you look up and you've got this skylight waterfall that is just coming down on you there. Okay, so really quite a spectacular place. Our third waterfall along this particular tour is Skogafoss waterfall. What's fantastic about this particular waterfall is, yes, it's dramatic, it's beautiful, it's quite incredible, yet it is the 23rd waterfall in a cascade of waterfalls that's coming down from the highlands. So yes, it is amazing, but there are 23 other waterfalls very, very similar as you continue your walk up in the central part of Iceland. There is a treasure chest of gold, obviously, within the waterfall. It's quite safe. And the reason why this waterfall is quite famous now, actually, is because a well-known pop star, I'm sure for a lot of you, Justin Bieber, he made this particular waterfall famous by shooting his video to I'll Show You Here. And he actually did decide to swim in the waters here, which was quite cold, as well as climb up the sides of this particular waterfall. Solheimajokull glacier is an area that I'm sure that the majority of you who have taken days off to maybe do the climate change rallies will find really, really fascinating. We know that glaciation isn't so much in our syllabus anymore. We learn a little bit about it. But the reason why this particular glacier is particularly important on your travels to Iceland is to learn about the impacts of climate change. Yes, we can see glacial features here. We can see hanging valleys. We can see terminal, lateral, medial moraine. There's a glacial lagoon. You can also see there in the background the basalt columns, the different layers of lava and rock. But as I said to you, the climate change here is so dramatic to see. In the last 10 years, this glacier has retreated on average between 50 and 75 meters per year. And scientists do believe that if climate change continues in the way that it is, that actually within 200 years, there'll be no glaciers in Iceland at all. So I really think that this particular glacier is a fantastic example to use to show the impacts of climate change. And if you think about that, if you've got 11% of Iceland covered in ice and glaciers, and you're not going to have any glaciers left, think about how much more water is going to be in circulation within our atmosphere, within our environment. And really, I want you to think like a geographer and think about the impacts of that. So from here, we are going to go down to Reynishverfi, or more commonly known, the Black Beach. You can see here some stacks in the foreground, and you've got the basalt columns here on the left-hand side, which are amazing to climb and to look at. Puffin colonies are here, so really quite a spectacular place to visit. And obviously the beach is black. It's one of the most dangerous beaches in Iceland as well, so you do have to keep away from the shoreline because there is a very deep sort of shelf that falls just in the sea here, but the wave formations are just spectacular to sit and watch. So the black basalt columns here, that is formed because the lava, when it meets the seawater, has cooled and contracted very, very quickly, and it fractures as it does that. And the quickest way to do that is to actually form these hexagonal shapes. And this is very typical of some of the areas on the coastlines in Iceland, and it's quite representative as well of the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. Because we've got this resistant rock, and then obviously we have some less resistant rock, we have bays and headlands in Iceland, so lots of beaches and lots of headlands. And just around the road from from Reynishverfi beach, we obviously have this headland here, which is your typical textbook sort of example of your crack, cave, arch, stack, stump formation. And it's a really, really good case study to use. Again, fantastic puffin colony going on here, and you can understand why, but we do have some fantastic arch formations as well as stacks and stumps. And the cracks in the rock here lend themselves to sort of like these formations on a very large scale and lots of them. So quite a dramatic place to actually see and to be a part of. I'm going to show you here a waterfall that isn't widely visited on your trip to Iceland, but we have been including it more and more because we really want you to not just think like geographers, but actually think like geographical scholars. And actually, within your amazing trip to Iceland, actually think, okay, if something was to change here, how would it impact the people? How would it impact the environment? How would it impact sort of like the economy? How would it impact the physical features of this particular area? So the reason why I'm including Urridafoss here is because there is some talk that this particular area, which in the summer is one of the most voluminous waterfalls in Iceland, there is some talk here that they are going to build a hydroelectric power plant just here where the band of rocks are. And I want you to really think about that. How would this area change? How would this area be impacted if we were to do that? So, Hveragerdi, we're slightly going back up our road one now. So we were in Vík and now we've moved back up through Selfoss and we're in Hveragerdi. Hveragerdi is the greenhouse town. It has around about 3,000 inhabitants. In 2008, there's a smaller lake, just 6.3 on the Richter scale. And after that earthquake, you can see there in the image, a lot of geothermal vents opened up. So the Icelandic people, being quite sort of like resourceful, don't forget they live in quite a harsh environment, they decided to harness these vents and tap into them. They had already been using geothermal power for some time, but this particular town decided to really harness these vents, and now they have hundreds of greenhouses where they are growing fruit and vegetables all year round. And this has created a much more sustainable food source for Iceland. Prior to then, I would say that a lot of their fruit and vegetables had to be imported from other countries, which meant it was very, very expensive. So fresh fruit and vegetables at certain times of the year were really very, very high value items, whereas now they can actually grow enough fruit and vegetables within their greenhouses because technology has moved on. So they have this good, resourceful, sustainable food source, and they are not quite so reliant on imports anymore. Culturally, the Icelandic people love warm water and they love the outside. Every town and village in Iceland has an outdoor geothermally heated swimming pool, and you will often find the locals enjoying a fantastic, relaxing time in the hot tubs and the pools in the towns and the villages. Quite a lot of political discussion goes on in these pools, and it really is the pub so much that we have in this country, that the Icelandic people, they don't really have pubs and that sort of stuff. So they actually go and they visit the hot tubs and continue their meetings and their discussions in these areas. The reason why I'm showing you this particular river is because it's just outside the town of Hveragerdi, and it's Varmá, which means warm river, and you can actually swim in this river. It sits at around about 35 degrees centigrade, and which is like a hot bath really, and you will often find the locals and tourists actually taking quite a challenging walk up the river and finding the little hot spots and naturally heated sort of like flurries in the water where they can enjoy the outside and a warm sort of experience. So moving on to hydroelectric power now, and we've spoken a little bit about this, and we've said, haven't we, that the majority of hydroelectric power actually is used for the aluminium plants. This particular hydroelectric power plant is just at the south of the Pingvellir National Park. And what happens here is they are harnessing the waters, the fast-flowing glacial waters, which turns the turbines and actually generates quite a lot of electricity. Again, it's renewable, it's sustainable, doesn't create any pollution at all, and it really gives them very cheap electricity and energy that they can use all the year round. Kerið is famous for a number of reasons. Personally, I love Kerið because it is, look at the colours, you know, it is just iron rich, it's absolutely stunning, it's beautiful. You can walk around the edge of this particular crater. This crater was formed 6,500 years ago. It's an extinct caldera, and it really is the most spectacular place to visit. It is a natural amphitheatre, as you can see from the structure of this particular crater. And Björk, who's one of the most famous Icelandic pop stars, and Coldplay, who I'm sure you've all heard of as well, they both actually had concerts in this particular crater. They put rafts in the middle of the lake down the bottom there, and they performed to their audience who sat round the edge of the crater, and just the most spectacular experience, I'm sure. So, but it shows you the different formations, the different craters that happen in this area. This is a caldera area in the central part of Iceland. I've included today free timer greenhouses, and the reason for doing this is continuing on the forward-thinking nature of the Icelandics in terms of harnessing the resources that they've got and using them to the very best of their advantage, but also in terms of the globalization aspect. And free timer greenhouses are a small greenhouse business that have now really extended their production. Again, they are harnessing the geothermal energy, and they're growing enough tomatoes in this area to actually be able to export them out to other Nordic countries. They bring the bees in to pollinate the plants because there are no real insects or bees or wasps or flies or anything in Iceland. So they bring the bees in from the Netherlands to pollinate the plants, and then they produce enough food all year round to sell in the supermarkets and, like I said, to export. What I'm particularly impressed with about the free timer philosophy is the fact that they have done a lot of work with some of the very densely urban populations in some of the very large cities around the world. So Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Dakar, all of those sort of areas. They've done a lot of work with a lot of scientists there to start looking at how they can produce food on a large scale in a very small area. And they've been part of quite a lot of research papers on this. So they are using the skills and what they have learnt, sharing them around the world, which actually hopefully will be taken on board by some of these sort of like struggling communities where there just isn't enough food to feed the population in a small area. I didn't even put a heading on this particular slide because I think the slide says it all, the Icelandic horse. There are 80,000 Icelandic horses in Iceland. However, there are 100,000 Icelandic horses elsewhere in the world, with around about 2/3 of those actually being in Germany. They are a unique breed. They're very strong, very robust. They're very resilient to disease, and they have very long life expectancy. They have 2 extra gaits, which is slightly strange. First of all, they have the tolt. It's a very smooth, sort of like a running action where the horse is trained to lift their back legs slightly higher. So therefore they can run quite quickly on the lava fields and in the different environments in Iceland. In addition to that, they have the flying pace. And this is where they move their legs really fast and the horse moves very quickly across the landscape, yet its back remains very steady. This means that they are very easy and comfortable to ride. Icelandic law actually has protected this breed, and they are not allowed to bring any other horse breed into Iceland at all. So Icelandic horses are the only horses in Iceland. And then also, if you are a breeder of horses, or you wish to show, or you wish to race an Icelandic horse, and you took it out of Iceland, you are not allowed to bring it back in. So it really has protected this unique and very special nature of this particular horse. Our last waterfall on our tour is probably the most famous waterfall in Iceland. You will be really pleased to know that this is a typical textbook waterfall. You have got the bands of hard and soft rock. You have got volcanic rock at the top, being the lava, very, very resistant, and you have got glacial moraine underneath that lava, which is the softer rock, which is less resistant. This particular waterfall follows a fissure, the weakness in the rock, and the gorge now has been sort of like retreating back, and it now sits around about 7 kilometres in length. The waterfall itself is actually a cascading waterfall, and it's not the highest waterfall in the world. It's actually only 32 metres high, but it is quite spectacular because it drops over different cascades. It's called Gullfoss, which is the Golden Falls. And there are two stories as to why this is called the Golden Falls. The first one is because the water that runs through these falls, the river, the Cuitá River, which runs through these falls, comes from a glacial source. So therefore, the river contains quite a lot of glacial sediment. And when the sun shines on that glacial sediment, it kind of looks a creamy gold. So that could be the reason why. Another reason is the fact that quite often, because this particular waterfall is south-facing, when the sun shines, you actually get the most spectacular rainbows over this particular waterfall. And they always say that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So therefore, could it be called the Golden Falls because of that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? I will leave you to decide. One of the fantastic stories about this particular waterfall is of a young lady who was completely passionate about this waterfall. She loved this waterfall. Her name is Sigríður Tómasdóttir, and she was the daughter of the landowner who owned this particular waterfall. And in the early 1900s, the landowner was approached by a British company who wished to buy the waterfall and put a hydroelectric power plant on it. And she was mortified that this was going to happen. She loved this waterfall. She knew that many, many people came and visited this waterfall, and she loved the beauty of it. So she, first of all, said that if he sold the waterfall, she was going to throw herself in. But rather than doing something quite so dramatic, she actually did a peaceful protest where she walked from Gullfoss to Reykjavik across the lava fields barefoot. And I can say to you, this is around about 175 kilometres. So it's quite some way in quite harsh conditions. Anyway, her protest basically changed the course of history, because her father decided that actually he wouldn't sell the waterfall to the British developer. He actually gave the waterfalls to the Icelandic nation, and then they became a protective site. Now, it just shows you the actions of one young lady can actually change the course of history. And I think that that has quite strong similarities with the current global climate protests that are going on, how one young lady can actually capture the mood of a nation and actually get people to sort of show what they really strongly believe in. So next, within our Golden Circle area, so we're now in the more central part of Iceland, we have the geyser area. The word geyser actually derives from the Icelandic word meaning gusher, and actually in Icelandic it is geyser. The geysers are a non-permanent geological feature. And so the original geyser actually doesn't erupt anymore, and it hasn't done so in many years. However, this particular picture is showing a geyser called Strokkur, and this does still erupt every 6 to 8 minutes. Now, geysers, they form when water flows through the natural plumbing of an area. In this particular area, we have lots of cracks, fissures, and fractures in the rock. So the groundwater flows through these cracks, fissures and fractures into a reservoir. This is then geothermally heated, but the cold water still continues to go on top of that hot water, and this caps the hot water and it pressures it down. This then becomes superheated, and this actually goes beyond the standard pressure boiling point. Eventually, the pressure can no longer be held back and it is released, and there is this fantastic geyser eruption. So it's always amazing as a guide that when I go to this particular area and the geyser goes off and you hear everybody go, wow, amazing, amazing. And then they think they've missed it. And then it goes again sort of like 6 minutes later. You can also see in this particular picture, you have got the geothermal vents going over there, and you can see the colours of the rock here, which just shows you the high levels of minerals that actually are present in geothermal areas and volcanic areas. This particular area is very iron rich, so therefore a lot of the rock actually is incredibly hot because it has that high metallic content that is heated from the magma underneath. Our final stop on the Golden Circle tour is the Pingvellir National Park. This particular area actually straddles the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So the Mid-Atlantic Ridge actually goes through the centre of the Pingvellir National Park. Tectonically and geologically, it is very, very unique. And as geographers, I know most of us are geographers and we try to look forwards rather than back, but actually historically, this is also very, very important as an area. The word Pingvellir actually means the meeting place. And this is the meeting place of two plates. You've got the North American plate on one side and the Eurasian plate on the other. But it's actually the meeting place of people, because this is where in 930 AD, it marks the site of the first democratic parliament anywhere in the world. They do consider that the political system in Iceland was actually the first parliament ever to be formed anywhere in the world. This particular area was created by a shield volcano called Skildabrauda, which means broad shield. This particular volcano erupted 9,000 years ago. It was a subglacial eruption, which basically meant it was underneath the glacier. And then when the glacier melted, there was this rift valley that had been formed. In addition to that, because it's on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, it's also on a constructed divergent plate margin. So therefore you have got the Eurasian plate moving one way, the North American plate moving the other. So you've actually got this sort of like tectonic movement as well. So there are two tectonic features in play in this particular area. You can see here on the side of the American plate, which is what we are looking at, you can actually see the bands of rock. And these, like we saw on the Reykjanes Peninsula right at the beginning of our tour, show the different lava flows from the different lava eruptions over the years. I wanted to introduce you to the fjords in Iceland because they are stunning and they are spectacular, and there are many fjords, particularly on the west and the east coast of Iceland. This one is my particular favourite. It's only around about 60 kilometres north of Reykjavik, and it's called the Whale Fjord. It's very large. It's around about 30 kilometres long, 84 metres deep, and where it meets the sea, it's around about 7 kilometres in width. This is the area where the British and the American military were very sort of like active in World War II, and they had many different camps along this fiord so they could carry out some of their strategic plans. It's called the Whale Fjord mainly because of its size, but also because during certain times of the year, because it is such a large fjord, the whales actually do come into the fjord as well. And there are many different whales in Iceland. There's the minke whale, fin whales, humpback whales, and then of course the beautiful and graceful orcas as well. And the whales are just coming into Iceland now, so they're just migrating in. So I know that sort of like some of the locals have been sort of like saying that they've seen fantastic whale sightings over the last couple of weeks. So from there, we're going to go to Reykjavik, the world's northernmost capital. And this was the first permanent settlement place. Ingolfur Arnason, who came into Iceland in 874 AD, he came across the island and threw logs off his ship stating, wherever these logs land, this is where I'm going to settle. And they actually settled in this bay. And he came on shore and he saw the steam from the geothermal energy, and he was obviously in a bay, and he named this particular site Smoky Bay, Reykjavik. So Reik meaning smoke and Vik meaning bay, so Smoky Bay. And it is the most spectacular city. As I said, it's only got a population of 170,000. So whilst, you know, it's sort of quite a sparsely populated area in terms of Iceland, Reykjavik itself does have the majority of that population. And this slide just shows you some of the famous sites of Iceland. If we go around, sort of like from the top left, we have the Perlan building here, which used to house the hot water for Reykjavik. So those towers there, they used to store the hot water and then gravity would take it down. Going from there, going down, you've got the Hallsgrim Church with the rainbow in front. And Katrin Jakobsdóttir, who is the Prime Minister of Iceland, she is very, very forward-thinking in terms of equality, sustainability, and security. And she's actually won global and international awards for her thoughts and her papers and for making her country very forward-thinking, very accepting, and very tolerant. And this rainbow depicts sort of like that tolerance and that acceptance of all. In a just very similar vein, the Hofti house here on bottom left, this is the area that, or the house where the Reykjavik summit of 1986 was held. And those particular steps there shows the area where President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev had a very, very famous handshake, which was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. So it really was a significant point in history as to sort of like the ending of these bad relations between America and Russia. The new Parliament House is the top in the middle there, and the Sun Voyager in the centre. This obviously does show sort of like the Viking heritage of the Icelandic nation. But more importantly, it shows the forward-thinkingness and their optimism, because what this Viking ship is meant to represent is that actually you should follow your dreams. You then have a pond in the middle there, the Harper building being Reykjavik's main concert hall on the top right there, and then another picture there of the Hallsgrim Church with a statue of a very famous Norse explorer by the name of Leif Erikson. Leif Erikson was the son of the very famous Viking Eric the Red, and the sagas will tell us that he was the first European ever to set foot on the continent of North America. And he arrived in North America and set up a settlement called Vinland, which actually is now said to be Newfoundland, which is in modern day Canada. So that's sort of where he comes from. Very, very famous Icelandic person. We want you to be responsible travellers, and the 4 pillars of responsible travellers. I'm not going to go through these too much because I'm sure your teachers and you will have thought of them before, but we want you to stay safe, to be curious, to respect the people, and ultimately to respect the place that you are going to. You will find on our website the most amazing resource, which has fantastic videos and drone footage of lots of different places in Iceland. There are 40 different sites that we have chosen, where we have taken sort of like a special film crew that have gone in and taken very short, sharp videos, no more than a minute each, on each of these sites to actually show you some of the views of Iceland. You will notice that the majority of these have been in the area that we have followed today, but some of them take you to the more sort of like remote areas in Iceland. And I really would encourage you to go onto our website, go onto this interactive GIS map and actually explore the country. Simon Ross, he's actually done a lot of he's a very famous geographer that's written many of the textbooks that you'll use in the classroom. He's actually done a lot of the commentary for us as well. So it is very geographically relevant. It links to your specifications, it links to your syllabuses, to your schemes of work, and it will really enhance your learning in the classroom. I just want to read you a philosophy from the Icelandic people itself. And if there's one phrase that captures the Icelandic innate sense of optimism better than any other, it's this: Þetteradast. Okay, Þetteradast should be emblazoned across the nation's coat of arms. It's a phrase that captures the essence of the Icelandic people perhaps better than any other. Their optimism, their irreverence, their faith, their tenacity. It also happens to be the phrase that the Icelandic people, and I actually, use quite constantly, particularly at the moment. It basically means this will all work out one way or another. So, just lost your job, Þetteradast. No money in the bank, Þetteradast. COVID-19, Þetteradast. Volcano just spewed ash all over your land, Þetteradast. I love the phrase Þetteradast, and to me it incorporates a profound philosophy, because when things are totally dark and you can't really see the way out, often the best thing you can do is to just let it go and trust that somehow, some way, things will always work out for the best. And the amazing thing is that they always do, okay? I would encourage you to plan your next trip to Iceland. Get your itinerary in place, have a glimmer of hope so that in the future, you've got something amazing to look forward to, and you can really enjoy some of these sites and highlights that I've shown you today. I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon. We do have more webinars coming up. We have one tomorrow, and we have another one on Friday morning. And then we're visiting Eyjafjallajokull as a case study on Monday afternoon. We will have more webinars in the future, and we do offer really, really good resources and things that can help you on our website. So if you have any questions at all, please do let me know. You'll be able to find me via the website. And in the meantime, Þetteradast, and stay safe, everybody.